There's a promise you make to yourself when you leave the grid behind. You trade sirens for wind, streetlights for stars, and you tell yourself the solitude is safe because the deep woods are empty. That's the lie the quiet tells. Because the people I'm about to introduce you to learned over long nights of sweat and shaking hands that the wilderness is far from empty. It is crowded with things that have been waiting for someone like you to move into their territory. Tonight, you'll hear from Miriam, who discovered that her own voice could be stolen and used to lure her husband into the dark. From Ellis, a widower who spent a winter with something that tapped on his windows and whispered in the voice of his dead wife. And from Theo, a father who found the source of a crying infant deep in the forest and nearly lost his child to it. These are not campfire tales. They are testimonies from people who built their homes miles from civilization and realized too late that their closest neighbors were not even human. Stoke the fire, check your locks, and listen close. The woods are listening too. My husband David and I moved to the hollow 50-acre patch of second-growth forest in the Ozarks in late September. With a half-built cabin, a vegetable garden sketched on paper, and enough enthusiasm to burn through any doubt. The first 2 weeks were idyllic, all sawdust and wood smoke, and the distant yipping of coyotes. Then David came in from splitting logs one afternoon and said he'd heard me calling him from the creek, except I'd been inside canning all day. I laughed it off, blamed the wind. But I saw something flicker behind his eyes that I'd never seen before, a sliver of unease. 3 nights later, I was the one who heard it. I was on the porch after sunset, waiting for David to return from checking the snares, when his voice clear, unmistakable, right down to the slight rasp he'd had since bronchitis called my name from the tree line. "Miri, come here. I need help." My feet moved before my brain engaged, and I got halfway across the yard before I realized David was standing in the cabin doorway, his face bloodless. He'd heard it too, and from a different direction his own voice, calling from the north while I was hearing it from the east. We stood back to back on that porch, and the voice came again, this time layered. Chorus of our own stolen tones weaving together into a garbled, desperate plea that seemed to come from the air itself. That night we sealed the cabin and sat with a rifle across our laps. The thing outside circled us for hours, its footsteps crunching through the leaf litter in a wide, patient loop. Once I peered through a crack in the shutter and saw a shape at the edge of the lantern light, tall and thin, with limbs that bent at one too many joints. Its head cocked like a bird listening for worms. It didn't have a face I could parse, just a shifting blur of features that would settle momentarily into David's eyes, my nose, our daughter's mouth, before dissolving again. It was sampling us. The siege lasted until dawn, when the footsteps retreated and a single, perfect copy of my laugh rang out from deep in the woods, followed by the words, "I'll learn you soon." We packed the truck that morning and never went back, but the mimic didn't stay behind. A month later, in our city apartment, David's phone rang with a call from my number that I wasn't making. And when he answered, his own voice said, "I'm almost finished learning. We changed our numbers, our locks, our city, but I know the thing is still out there, refining its library of human sounds, waiting for the next couple to move into the hollow with dreams of peace and quiet. Because the quiet is exactly what it uses." After my wife Lydia passed from cancer, I sold the house and bought 20 acres of pine and granite in the Bitterroot Mountains, a place so remote the Postal Service wouldn't deliver. I built a one-room cabin with my own hands, and for 6 months I grieved in the silence, finding a kind of peace in the rhythm of chopping wood and boiling coffee. The first snow came in November, a blanket that muffled the world into a gray hush, and that's when the tapping began. It started as a single, deliberate tap on the window above my kitchen, sink like a pebble thrown from a short distance. I thought it was ice falling from the branches, but it happened again the next night at the same time. 2:17 a.m., a crisp click that woke me from a dream of Lydia. I went outside with a flashlight, expecting a branch or a stunned bird, and found nothing but a set of tracks in the fresh snow. The tracks were not human, but they were bipedal long, narrow prints that sunk deep into the powder, indicating something heavy walking upright. They led from the tree line, circled the cabin twice, and stopped directly beneath the tapped window. I measured the stride. Whatever made it was 7 feet tall at least. I started sleeping with my .3006 by the bed, and on the 4th night, the tapping came not as a single pebble, but as a slow, rhythmic drumming of what sounded like long fingernails dragging across the glass. I lay frozen, and then I heard it. Lydia's voice. It whispered my name from just outside the window, soft and tender, the way she used to when she'd wake me from a nightmare. Ellis, let me in. I'm cold, honey. Every rational part of my brain knew my wife was ashes in a box on the mantel, but my heart seized and I nearly wept. The voice came again, a little sharper, a little impatient. Ellis, open the window. I can't stay out here forever. That impatience saved me. Lydia would never have been impatient with me, not once in 30 years. And the thing outside Slip-Tit's mimicry was almost perfect, but it didn't understand love. I chambered around and shouted that it could tap all it wanted, but the door stayed shut. The tapping stopped. Then the window frosted over from the outside. A shape formed in the ice hand, huge, with fingers that had won too many knuckles and a face pressed against the glass. It was Lydia's face, but stretched over a skull that was too long, the smile wide and crammed with translucent teeth, the eyes black and wet like oil puddles. It tapped once more, a nail on glass, and then it was gone, leaving a smear of something that steamed in the cold. I never saw it again that winter. But in spring, I found a shallow den dug under the roots of a fallen cedar 50 yards from the cabin, lined with deer bones and the tattered blue cloth of Lydia's old winter coat, the coat I'd buried her in, 400 miles away. I don't know how it got there, but I know the thing had been wearing pieces of my wife. Scent and voice and memory, trying to build a key to my door. I still live in the cabin, but I've nailed tin sheeting over every window, and I never ever answer when a voice calls my name in the dark. The woods around my home are full of love I don't recognize. What? And I'm afraid that one night I might be too lonely to tell the difference. My wife, Naomi, our 5-year-old daughter, Clara, and I had been homesteading in a remote valley in northern Idaho for 18 months when we first heard the baby. It was a thin, reedy cry, cutting through the dusk, coming from somewhere down by the creek. Clara, ever the little protector, looked up from her coloring book and said, "Daddy." The baby sat again. That word pricked my spine because I hadn't told her I'd been. Hearing the cry for 3 nights already, a distant wail that always started just after sunset and faded before full dark. I'd assumed it was a fox or some night bird I didn't know, but foxes don't cry with the hitch of a human infant. On the 4th night, Naomi heard it too, and she gave me a look that said, "We need to check this out." I took my hunting rifle and a high-beam flashlight and walked toward the sound, which led me to a hollow old-growth cedar at the edge of the creek. The crying was coming from inside the trunk, down where the roots formed a dark hollow, and I knelt and shone the light in. At first, I saw nothing but wet moss and the glint of standing water. Then 2 points of light glowed back, not eyes. Exactly, but twin spots of phosphorescent green, set in something pale that was curled up like a sleeping child. The crying rose in pitch, desperate, and I heard Naomi behind me whisper, "Is it a baby? Theo? Did someone abandon a baby?" The pale thing uncurled. It was not a baby. It had limbs like a human infant, but too long, too thin, jointed like a spider's legs, and its head swiveled toward us with a wet pop. The face was the worst. It had no features except a lipless gash of a mouth that was currently shaped into a perfect O, emitting that heart-wrenching cry. And then it stopped crying and spoke in Clara's voice. "Daddy, pick me up. I'm cold." I felt a wave of compulsion, a literal physical tug. And my arms started to lift. Naomi grabbed my collar and yanked me backward. And the thing in the hollow let out a screech that shattered the illusion, a sound like a cat being crushed under a car tire. It lunged, its spidery limbs scrabbling at the dirt, and I fired the rifle blind into the hollow before we ran. Back at the cabin, we found Clara standing at the open front door, glassy-eyed, repeating, "The baby wants to play. The baby says I can be its new sister." We grabbed her and locked ourselves inside. And that night, the crying came from directly under the cabin. For hours it wept and whimpered and called our names in a perfect parade of stolen voices. Naomi's mother, my dead brother, Clara's kindergarten teacher. Dawn, it stopped, and we fled to town. I later spoke to a Nez Perce elder who told me the valley was known as a place where a skinwalker child had been bound centuries ago, a creature that lured families in with cries and then replaced their children with itself, wearing their skin until it was ready to molt. He said the only way to keep it at bay was never to answer its call. Clara had already answered, and for months afterward she would wake from nightmares describing a hollow tree and a friend who was teaching her how to peel her skin off like a wet sock. We moved 3 states away, and Clara is older now, seemingly fine. But last week I found her crouched by the storm drain at the end of our street, humming a tune I didn't recognize. When I called her name, she turned and said, "The baby's sad. Daddy, it says it misses me." I looked into the storm drain, and deep in the dark, 2 faint green lights flickered. 3 homesteaders, 3 dreams of a quiet life, and 3 encounters with neighbors that weren't in any census. Isolation is a magnifying glass. It takes the faint sounds of the wild and amplifies them into something that can follow you home, learn your voice, and call your name with the intimacy of a loved one. These stories burrowed under your skin. Please hit that like button and subscribe. I'll keep bringing you true, human-voiced horror that reminds you the wilderness has teeth and memory. Tell me in the comments, would you have opened the window, followed the cry, or stayed frozen in your cabin? I read every story you share, and the most chilling will be featured in a future video. Until next time, trust the silence, doubt the familiar, and never ever answer a voice in the dark without first checking the eyes of the thing that wears it? Sleep tight.